We all know sexism, we know racism, we know lots and lots of other isms. But here's another important one. Speciesism, we just don't like it. When there's another species that can do exactly the same things that we do. I'm known for the topic of experience. You know, I wrote a lot on customer experience management and experiential marketing. But in the future, we may have very, very different types of experiences. For the purpose of this particular talk, I have rebranded, renamed myself as BS 2049. That's, of course, an allusion to lots and lots of different things. First of all, my name, Bernd Schmitt, right? My acronym is BS. But since I'll talk about the future and the far-out future, there's a lot of BS coming too. Not only that, some of you may have seen the latest Blade Runner movie, which was playing in 2049, right? It's also an allusion to the first cyborg, so to speak, or the first person who wrote about cyborgs. The book was called Are You a Transhuman? And it was written by F.M. 2030. He was the first professor on that sort of topic in the new school. He's passed away in the year 2000, but he always called himself FM 2030. So I'm alluding to lots of different things here with my BS 2049. And what we're really going to do is we are going to talk about various developments and how to sort of conceptualize them from a broad perspective, from a psychological, philosophical, of course also marketing perspective, because I'm a marketing professor. We'll be looking at some data, some academic studies, okay? They are only the tip of the iceberg. We've done lots of work recently on this transformation from humans to cyborgs, meaning enhancing ourselves through various technologies and thus adding some technology component to our humanness. We've also done a lot of studies where we looked at robots becoming more human. For example, in the form of androids, they look more and more like us. They can do more and more things like us as humans. And when I say we, I mean doctoral students that I'm working with, in particular a student called Noah Costello, who was on a panel here actually a couple of years ago at BRITE. Also So-Young Kim, she's a visiting scholar from Korea. I'm also doing studies with other people. For example, in Korea, we are currently looking at various projects too. So we have lots and lots of data. So I'll be very, very selective in terms of what I'm going to show you. But the question is really to what degree those sorts of developments, going from human to cyborg, as well as from robot to android, are of significant importance for our own conceptions of who we are as humans. Now, you have all heard the term singularity, that point in time when you cannot distinguish humans from these technologies anymore. And singularity normally means, well, you can distinguish because the AI system has become so smart that it is basically be able to pass as a human. But you can take singularity even in a more radical way by saying it's not only the thoughts and the decision processes and the cognitions and the intelligence that is equivalent to humans. And as a matter of fact, in many respects, in many domains, it is already surpassing humans. So we have surpassed one of the tests that is often being posed in the context of singularity, which is the Turing test, right? Would you be able to tell if you're interacting with a system that is outside that room and we can only communicate through writing, for example, or maybe through voice, whether this is actually a robot or an AI system or a human? I think we are beyond that point already. But you could pose another challenge for singularity, which is that in terms of its entire physical form, in terms of every single aspect of the behavior, not only the mind, but also including certain other aspects that are probably internal to us, such as feelings and creativity, but also in terms of our outward behavior, how we are moving, right? And how we are speaking and how we are our gestures and all of that, whether there will be a point where the technology will be equivalent to human. So take that also as a point of a sort of singularity, of a more sophisticated, of a more challenging singularity that we are also increasingly, I think, approaching. So what I'm really going to talk about here is when you think of humans becoming cyborgs, that's often framed in terms of transhumanism, right? Are we still humans or are we transhumans, past humans, beyond humans? So for example, are we more robotic in nature? Now, some people see this idea of transhumanism very, very positively. Lots of technologists do. Some are also more critical. For example, Francis Fukuyama, who you may know because he wrote a very, very important book on history called The End of History, meaning the end of ideological systems. We are past ideology by now, is very, very critical of this kind of view that, well, we want to create something transhuman. He sees lots and lots of ethical issues in doing this when we are, for example, changing our human species. Well, there's also a debate, on the other hand, with respect to robots becoming androids. Well, are they still robots or are they now humans? As a matter of fact, at the point of singularity, does it even make any sense anymore to distinguish between humans and robots? Or after having passed the Turing test and some other tests like the Chinese room puzzle and other philosophical tests, well, maybe now it makes no more sense to even distinguish between the two. Some people are saying, yes, that's how it is, right? I mean, maybe we are ourselves robots and we just don't know. That's the simulation hypothesis. Or others are much, much more critical and are saying, well, you know, robots can never be exactly like humans. So I call that sort of movement, there is no word for it, but I call it ad hominemism because homo means, well, human, right? Man, kind. And we are going towards that as robots, as a system. So ad, accusative in Latin, hominem, you know that phrase, ad hominem, it's also something negative. And indeed, a lot of people also think this development is not particularly positive because the robots are somehow infringing on our human territory. So call it ad hominemism. All right, so, well, you can do all of this conceptually, philosophically. I'm a business professor, I'm in marketing, so I'm interested in actually how do, let's say, consumers see these sorts of things. So we're doing some experiments that you could call consumer experiments. They're a little bit wacko consumer experiments, as you will see in a moment. They are more like what I call, in terms of consumer behavior CB, what I call sci-fi CB. But I think they can tell us, nonetheless, some maybe interesting insights on what is going on in this space. Now, what are we using in our studies? Well, we are using human enhancement technologies. Now, human enhancement technologies, in a way, have been around for a long, long time. Think of a pacemaker, that is a human enhancement technology. You might even think of certain pills to enhance your performances. They are human enhancement technologies. The ones we are looking here is, the one on the left is TDCS, which is basically sending a slight electric current through your brain, and it's been shown to improve your decision making and your mood and a bunch of other things like that. It's actually commercialized. You can buy an equipment like this for about $150 to $200. But we can also go to something more radical, and in some experiments we are using something more radical, which is literally imagine you're changing your genetic code. So that's what we mean by human enhancement technologies. We are telling people that these things enhance certain human traits and certain abilities that we vary as well above normal human levels. We'll get to that in a moment. We are also looking at robots, and there we are particularly interested in what is called social robots. Now, you know, robots are everywhere as industrial robots. It's a growing business and has been for many, many years, right? Lots of factories have been automatized with robots. But what is sort of the interesting element when it comes to this human issue is, well, once the robots are becoming more like us, they're becoming social robots, they're interacting with us, so they are in a way consumer robots, not industrial robots anymore. And you see some examples in there, and you had some other ones already at this conference as well as previous BRITE conferences, right? As you can see, they can be used in retailing, right? You have at the top, for example, several robots of different forms that are used in retailing. In the second row, you have, for example, a robot that serves as a concierge, right, in a hotel or in a restaurant, or also in, you know, on the right-hand side, more in a healthcare sort of situation. And then you also have at the bottom the educational element in the first two, right? So you have, for example, a robot interacting with an autistic child, or a robot being used as a teacher in a classroom. And then on the right-hand side here at the bottom right, you have, well, the sex robots, right? Robots that you could have sex with. So this is sort of the space. All of these things are, to certain degrees, commercialized or have been used in the US or in various other countries. I'd like you to note that these robots have quite different physical forms, right? So some are just picking up very elementary elements of humans. For example, they have some sort of human face, or they're alluding to some sort of human face. These are robots like Pepper, for example, by SoftBank, that has implemented those robots in retail settings in Japan, is also in a big time now, presumably getting onto the US market. Then you have some other robots, they take on more physical forms, for example, in terms of the externalities, the arms and the legs. And then you have robots like the one that we have here as a concierge, that is very, very much like a real human. And there are these sorts of robots too, and they are strikingly similar to humans nowadays. There is one called Sophia by a company out of Hong Kong called Hanson's Robotics. She's giving speeches, as a corporate presenter. She's going to various different countries. There's one robot out of Japan, Erica. Okay, she's modeled out of the Osaka lab by a professor who's very, very much into these kind of humanoids, who in fact has also created a humanoid that looks like him. The problem is it's not exactly like him, so he's now trying to go through plastic surgery in order to make himself look perfectly like the robot. Which is sort of an interesting idea. Why should the robots always look like us? Why shouldn't at some point in time we ourselves look like robots? This gets me to the humanness hypothesis. In the studies, what we typically find is that it seems that consumer perceptions and behaviors to androids and cyborg technologies will depend on considerations of human nature and the perceived differences between human and machine. Now that's of course an old topic. It goes back to the Greeks, right? What is human nature? How are humans different from other species? Well, the philosophers have put together a long list according to which we differ from other species. For example, one is, well, we are rational. Or at least we are potentially able to be rational because, especially over the last few years, a lot of research in psychology as well as in economics has shown that people in many circumstances are not rational. It's a whole research area called behavioral economics that shows that people are prone to errors and biases. But that, of course, does not counter in any way the argument of the philosophers that say, in principle, we can be rational. Well, the philosophers have also come up with, well, the way we are unique compared to other species is we can have feelings in a very, very complex way. We can have experiences. Philosophers call it qualia. And they've come up with issues like, well, we can be creative and so on. We can have consciousness. So human nature can have various dimensions. And then we could debate to what degree, at this point in time, humans are indeed showing those differences to other species, and especially with respect to these new technological developments, whether this is still the case. Now that is the philosophers, but there's also, of course, a folk psychology, which is all of us. We are sort of naive observers of the world. We are not trained philosophers. And we may also, at the same time, though, use those sorts of criteria. We may also say, well, a computer can never be fully rational. A computer cannot have feelings. A computer can't be creative. It can't experience things. When you peek, a robot, for example, well, they won't experience pain. They don't have consciousness. They're just programmed. So that's what we are getting at. And we are also getting at something else here, which is referred to as the Uncanny Valley. You heard about it already yesterday. It was proposed in 1970 by a Japanese roboticist called Mori. And this is all over popular culture. So people refer to the Uncanny Valley all the time. Interestingly enough, you don't always get the Uncanny Valley. It's not always being able to replicate. It's not at all clear why there is an Uncanny Valley. But the effect that Mori was describing, and take first a look at the dotted line, which is for a moving robot, okay? For a moving robot, well, we started with the industrial robot down there. You get some sort of familiarity or liking. But then as we are making that robot closer and closer to humans, okay, the liking goes up. People like it when we are adding these human features, for example, in the social robots compared to the industrial robots. As we are taking these industrial robots into consumer spaces, we turn them into social and consumer robots, people like that. But then comes this sudden effect, which is, well, if these robots look too much like us, when they move around and show behaviors and they gesticulate and everything, well, we don't like it. And then, whoom, it goes down. And that's what he calls the uncanny valley. Now, note that it's sort of zombie-like. There's an uncanny feeling, an eerie feeling when they are too much like us. But then, of course, you can also see, well, there's the healthy person up there, all the way up there. And that healthy person, in a way, of course, is not the uncanny valley at all. They are at the top again. And in fact, they do better than, let's say, the humanoid robot that we have up there. Note that he also says, well, you get pretty much the same curve for still objects. So if I just show you photos of robots, or of a human, right, we would be getting the same sort of curve. Now, we did a study of 550 consumers, and we showed them 25 robots. They were rated based on their human likeness. We have the scale down there, okay? And we looked at the overall response. So do we get the uncanny valley? And actually, yes, we do, because we are starting sort of at the top there. We don't have any industrial robots in there. We only have consumer robots. So you have these kinds of robots that are already available. We have Pepper up there, right? We have Jibo there. So they are all sort of being commercialized. People know them by now, okay? They have some human features, but not too many. But then we are adding more and more human features. We are going all the way down to here, okay? This is our Android as currently possible. And guess what? The least liked. The least positive response on a composite measure of various things. Now that is in a way that, well, the uncanny valley. It's sort of the linear trend going down that Mori was proposing. And in fact, the correlation is very, very strong. It's minus 0.7. That's a quite strong, significant correlation. So that proves the uncanny valley. What also proves the uncanny valley are these two stars that you see up there at the top right, okay? This is actually a human. We also included a picture of a human. And we also got responses for that human. And guess what? Those two stars, they were significantly different from pretty much anybody in this entire space. So the human was still preferred to any robot. And we did this also for various situations, for example, for retailing, for healthcare. So it's independent of the context. People prefer a human to interact with them. Now, the really interesting point, though, is some little experimental tweak we did here, which is we showed the same picture of a human. And by the way, you see the picture right there, okay? Right underneath the stars, you have a picture of a woman. This is the one that was rated in these stars. But we also told people this is actually a perfect robot. It's a very advanced robot. So you have a judgment of a human as a human, and you have a judgment of a human as a robot. So this is the point of singularity, isn't it? Because you cannot distinguish anymore the human from the robot. Now, what happens in this case? Well, this human as a robot is not liked as much as a human. Now, that is odd, isn't it? Because you cannot distinguish the human from the robot anymore. But merely knowing that it is a robot, you don't like it as much. As a matter of fact, that particular data points that you have there are sort of like some of the others over here. It is a little bit better than the current Android, right? But it's not as good as the human. So we thought that was really, really interesting. So we did another study. And we did an experiment, because these are correlational data, as we always have them also in business. But with correlational data, you can never infer any causation. You never know what's going on. There could be multiple things going on. So we also were running an experiment. And for that experiment, we are using, for example, a current Android. And that current Android is called Nadine. She is out of a lab in Singapore. We've done lots of studies with Nadine. I had Nadine as a special guest at a conference that I was running in Singapore. So I'll show you a little clip about Nadine so you get a sense of her capabilities. So this is sort of what robots, what androids can do nowadays. Can I have that video, please? Good to have you again. Good to see you again.
Hello, Bernd.
Nadine, can I ask you a few questions? Is that okay? It's all right?
Sure, it will be my pleasure.
Nadine, let's start at the very beginning. When were you born?
I was born in Japan 3 years ago. I am trained in NTU.
I see. And what's your job? What do you
I am
do?
a receptionist. I can help and assist people.
I see. Okay. Can you give some specific examples on what you do?
I can indicate where a person is located, explain how to go to an office, give information about restaurants, the weather, and so on.
That's great. And besides your job, do you have any hobbies?
Hobbies are for humans, not for robots.
Let me ask you another question. Can you learn new things?
Yes, I am now learning how to recognize objects and to grasp them. I am learning how to recognize who does what around you and not only talking to you. I am learning to be aware of the environment.
That's great. So, could you actually be used in some consumer buying situations? Would that be possible?
When I will am able to walk and recognize objects, I will be able to become a saleswoman.
You know, earlier today we had something on medicine and healthcare. Could you be useful there in that sort of area?
I will care for the patient, do reports for the doctors. I will be their social companion when nobody is around 24 hours.
That sounds nice. Anything else that you could be useful for? Anything?
I can teach languages. I speak presently English, German, and French. I can train people to be naturally multilingual.
Any last words to our audience, Nadine?
Thank you, Bernd, for this discussion. I am your companion of the future. Bye-bye.
That's very nice of you. I love you, Nadine. Thank you very much for being here. Okay, good. Round of applause for our special guest, Nadine. All right, so this is Nadine. So you saw her capabilities. She's a typical android. And we are doing studies with her. Let me show you one of the studies that we have done with her, okay? We have somebody interact with her. So that's our humanoid robot. We are also throwing in a less human robot, one of those toy robots, right, that are commercialized everywhere. And we also have a real human. The real human in this case is, well, the inventor of Nadine. She modeled herself after the robot, right? That's typically done in that sort of business. We are also doing the same conversation. It's the same track and everything. We are showing that to people. And in the real human condition, we are presenting that person as a human that she is, but also as a perfect human robot. All right. I just want to show you quickly to get a sense of what the interaction looks like. So we are doing it for Nadine. So here's Nadine again with an interaction now that we are using in the experiment. And after?
Hello, Nadine.
Hi, it's delightful to see you.
My name is Felix.
It's good to meet you, Felix.
I'm a student in the marketing department at the business school.
What do you study there?
I study consumer behavior.
Is consumer behavior a hard subject?
Yes, but interesting.
All right, I thought so too.
Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Nadine. I'm a social companion.
You look beautiful today.
Thanks. You look attractive too.
It is so nice to talk with you.
I think we got enough. So we have a conversation like that, right? You know, the picture was not that great because we also ran the experiment with a much, much bigger picture that we had to edit. The reason was that it was not double blind in the sense that, well, the person who interacts with her knows, of course, who she is and might adjust their behavior, right? So for experimental control, you actually have to cut out the other person, okay? So this is, we run several experiments, but this is sort of the best. Now, the M here means a mean on an overall response. What do we get? Well, look at the real human presented as human, 2.13. That was actually, the scale is reversed, the highest rating. So the real human interaction is liked the most, all right? And it is actually pretty close to the less human robot. So the less human robot, the toy robot, does also pretty well. The humanoid robot, that was Nadine, she just does terrible, right? That's the Uncanny Valley effect, right, of the current androids. You feel weird, right? She doesn't interact like a human does. But what happens when we present the real human as a perfectly human robot? Okay, there's a significant difference between those two. It's exactly the same person. It's the same look. It's the same videotape. It's the same interaction. Simply knowing that it is a robot, you don't judge it as well. We have also replicated that in Japan. Now, in Japan, people are much more used to these humanoids. They're on TV all the time. They're also being commercialized already. Japan is far ahead in terms of androids. Do you get the same effect? Yes, you do. I'm not going to show you the details of the results, but you get the same effect. So why might this be the case? Well, here is our hypothesis. Speciesism as the ultimate human nature bias in folk philosophy. We all know sexism, we know racism, we know lots and lots of other isms. But here is another important one. Speciesism, we just don't like it. When there's another species that can do exactly the same things that we do. And that is because we went through a particular evolution. And they did not go through that evolution. When they peak themselves and they say to us, well, it hurts. It's not the same, because they do not have the same flesh. They do not have the synapses to create their thoughts. And that is the big separators. And that will always remain as a separator, is our hypothesis going forward, even if people become more familiar with those kinds of robots, as we have shown in Japan. So speciesism, they are just not like us. And we consider that to be a problem. We may have created them, but they're not like us. So that was, in a way, part one. We are going from robots to androids, but I also promised you the other side, right? From humans, we are going to cyborgs. Well, do we get some similar effect? And yes, we do. You're enhancing yourself. Now, that sounds great. You're becoming more human, aren't you? Superhuman. Fantastic. What we find paradoxically is that when we ask consumers what they think of this is, well, those technologically enhanced humans are seen as less human. They are dehumanized. We have lots of studies on this. We have a whole theory around it. Basically, as you make the enhancement also more and more unnatural, so you present it to people as synthetic rather than from a natural ingredient. Or as you're saying, well, they are really trying to enhance themselves, embellish themselves, rather than restore a deficiency that they may have had because of some accident. The more people are feeling, there's a problem here. They're dehumanizing them. They're saying they're more like machines. There's mechanical dehumanization going on. They're more like robots, and they don't like it. And the interest in the technology goes down. So, this idea of speciesism, of humanness, of what is human nature, when we enhance ourselves as well, when robots are becoming like us, is of course nowadays a big topic in lots and lots of different movies. There are movies that play with this idea of humans becoming cyborgs, like Transcendence or Ghost in the Shell. There are others that play with the idea of humans or AI systems becoming more like androids, such as Her or Ex Machina. You may have seen some of these movies. They're very instructive. I think they're really addressing a lot of the questions that I'm addressing here experimentally or through empirical data through an entertaining movie format. In fact, we've analyzed those, and we looked at the kind of issues that are coming up in those kinds of movies. So we've done a content analysis of the entire movie scripts, right, as well as of reviews and so on. And for example, when you're dealing with a mind in a human that becomes more like a machine, you're dealing with the issue of consciousness. And that is addressed indeed in that film called Transcendence. When you're adding a body to it that's going down here, that's the movie Ghost in the Shell, you're dealing with, well, what is myself? Who am I now with that body? That is not mine, but even though I have that consciousness. When you're dealing with the movie Her, well, there's a lot of things about relationships. And finally, in Ex Machina, there's the whole issue of interaction that's going on. And that leads ultimately, when it comes to mind and body, to the issue of how should we be embodied as any creature? When it comes to the mind is, well, are we reflective about ourselves? When it comes to machines becoming human, the issue is always intentionality. What are they all about? And when it comes to us becoming more like cyborgs, it's a question of identity. Who are we? Thank you.